Just wanted to touch base with my new proclivity for broadcasting through HAPS rather than StreamYard, to say hi and to celebrate that America has reached 100 million vaccinations in 58 days through the Biden administration's tireless efforts to respond in an effective and responsible way to the pandemic crisis and to the concomitant economic crisis. It's really great that so many have been vaccinated. There sounds like there might be a strong contingent of Republican Trump supporting holdouts, possibly 30% of the population. But at this point, we're still trying to meet the unmet need of people who are actually willing to get the virus as a preliminary, as a first step to containing the virus and trying to contain the various variants of the virus that threaten the success of the move to achieve herd immunity via vaccination, because herd immunity is an outcome to be reached in human populations via vaccination. Herd immunity in veterinarian populations, i.e. agricultural herds, then you describe herd outcome as just something that you sit back and watch happen because you're not as invested in preserving the lives of your animals. You're interested in that as an economic calculation. But for human beings, when we elect leaders and we live in functional democracies, we are expecting that action will be taken to preserve as many lives as possible, in an understanding that humans are also capable of sophisticated communication, and that consumer confidence is punctured by untrammeled pandemic spread, and that people will stop spending money when they hear news and they see outcomes amongst their own social circle of people dying, people falling sick, etc. So economic contraction is a consequence of an under-responded to pandemic. And during the Trump administration, those 4 terrible years, but specifically that extra murderous, genocidal final year of Trump's reign, they falsely conflated economic health and public health. You can't have economic health without public health, but they tried to pretend there was a choice between pursuing normality by ignoring the virus or addressing the virus. None of that was true. None of that was sound economic reasoning. All of it led to increased hardship, a prolonged and extended pandemic expression within the United States. And to his credit, Joe Biden is a sane leader who doesn't have as one of his principal goals preserving immunity from prosecution. I mean, that's clearly a very potent driver for Trump's actions to stay out of jail. Being the president gave him access to the public purse so that he could pour taxpayer money into his own pocket via his frequent trips to his own properties, where exorbitant rates were charged to Secret Service staff. And when I say charged to Secret Service staff, I mean charged to the taxpayer on behalf of the Secret Service staff, who were compelled to follow Trump around in little golf buggies and stay on Trump properties and pay very high nightly rates for rooms. So the American public was stolen from in many ways. And the extent of that theft will become more evident over time. But that's another motivation for Republicans to act up, to try and sabotage the American recovery in order to reduce the glaring level of difference between the activities of a functional federal government, such as the Biden administration, and the activities of a negligent, malevolent administration, such as the Trump administration, that not only failed America, but actively sabotaged the efforts of responsible public officials, responsible medical professionals, responsible researchers and scientists. Well, researchers are scientists, aren't they? Marsha says, glad to see you tonight. Yes, hi, Marsha. I know it was probably a bit of an emotional put through the ringer to watch me debate the revolution Rev McInnes yesterday was painful. I lived through that experience, but I didn't live through it as an audience member. So I can only sympathize rather than directly relate to any emotional distress it may have caused. But I've had some people message me saying, you were talked over and he wouldn't let you talk. So that was not fun to watch, for which I won't apologize because I didn't do it. I was subjected to it, but it has given me significant pause for thought as to whether or not I ever appear before. Ooh, everyone is talking about it. That's cool, I guess. It was a bit of an epic showdown in terms of a clash of perspectives. So, from my perspective, politics and power is about adding, is additive. You build coalitions, you help people grow in understanding, and you do exclude some people from being a coalition target in terms of you just choose where to invest your energy. So I've heard people have learnt to not invest too much time in trying to convert MAGA people or even QAnon folks. But then there's always some people out there who are able to prove us wrong. Some people who've been able to befriend KKK members and through significant investment of time and energy, get them to hang up their white robes and their Nazi ways and actually start acknowledging that people are people, including people from demographics they've previously been taught to construct their own sense of superiority via despising people from other demographics. It's often anti-blackness that motivates KKK members, but we know that there's often an anti-Semitic, anti-Asian, anti-migrant, anti-Mexican component as well, with people whose psyche runs on those wheels of despising others. Now, on the hard left, you'll sometimes get people whose psyche is comprised of yelling very loudly about how terrible everybody is. And I am not altogether on board with the functionality of that strategy. And in fact, I actively think it's disempowering to Black populations when people propose wildly unrealistic solutions to America's series of problems without denying the seriousness of the endemic problems that assail America. To say flip capitalism or overturn capitalism or take the GDP and divide it amongst everybody, i.e. communistic division of assets without a plan for how assets are to be developed and pursued going forwards. The utilitarian value of that is not only low, it's very sabotage oriented for coalitions. I mean, many Americans understand the destructive potential of communism and communistic approaches. A lot of Americans are migrants, and many have fled communist countries where they've seen firsthand what happens when people are able to build political power through promises of utopian levels of sharing and utopian levels of fairness. And then what happens is a consolidation of bureaucratic power, and the cronies and the elites derive all of the benefit, and the system for a functioning economy doesn't actually function well enough to keep the population in a state of prosperity or functionality, and people suffer and people queue for food, and maybe there's very evenly distributed healthcare, and maybe there's lots of promises of status for everybody and no more class systems, etc. But the outcomes are bad, and a lot of people lose their lives, a lot of people are put into re-education camps, and a lot of people flee. Ooh. Time for action. Jack is very racist, so I can click mute user, but it's unlikely to work. So what I can do instead is, I guess, ask everybody to report him as spam. He's very racist, and the last time he was on here, he was making disparaging remarks about Black Americans, which is something I'm happy to put in the deplorable basket and ask everybody to help with excluding them from conversations, because unrepentant racism doesn't have a place at this table, and I don't even want to make that risk-benefit calculation of could he be reformed through exposure to intelligent discussion and conversation. Yes, very racist. And the thing is, racist people often don't believe they are racist. They don't believe they deserve a label. They would describe themselves as race realists, and they just want the freedom to go around and make and cast negative aspersions against certain demographics. They have no interest in learning about correlations between or statistical correlations between, say, exposure to lead and deprivation of financial opportunity and relatively higher crime rates. They don't know that internationally, every country that has adopted standards to exclude lead from petrol has seen 20 years later a significant fall in crime levels, because children who are exposed to high levels of lead through air pollution, exhaust emitted by vehicles that use petrol, gas, are people who are more likely to have high levels of blood lead, and who are more likely to have developmental problems and therefore lack opportunity in life, because if you can't engage easily with the education system, it does make things more difficult. And it makes it statistically, or at a probabilistic level, more likely that crime will be a life outcome. And interestingly enough, there's data to illustrate that people who are white, who live in white dominant communities, have had government action, or have seen government action undertaken to remove lead from their houses, from when lead was included in paint to decorate houses with. But people who live in black communities have had less evident political power to compel action, because there's been less action taken to remove lead from houses occupied by people in predominantly black American areas. But yes, America saw a significant fall in crime after the introduction of laws which precluded lead from vehicle fuels. Yes, so I am not lying, but the racists are calling me liars. And I am trying to mute him, but because he's on Twitter, I can't. And I've muted him personally as a Twitter user, so I don't know what to do exactly. Maybe I can ask HAPS people for help if they turn up in my broadcast at any point. Good day, Craig. Nice to see you. Christopher, hello. Marsha says it all comes down to education, which is one perspective. Children, darlings, could you turn the sound down a little bit on the television, please?
I can't take the sound down because I don't have that.
Oh, you use the remote control and you... Yeah, you can do it, darling.
No, that's how you pause it. Oh, wait.
Sweetie, if you experiment with the buttons, you'll find it. Okay. All right, I guess if I just quickly mute a comment from him as soon as I see his name. Yay, he's getting some of the attention he craves, and I'm having to do an extra task, because racists make more work for people as well as endangering everybody's lives. If racism hadn't been so popular in the United States, Russia would have had less fertile ground to exploit the disinformation channels that have flourished in the US over the last 40 years. Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, conservative radio, etc., to push barely plausible disinformation on gullible people. So there's an intelligence report that has come out over the last few days highlighting the degree to which Russian collusion was embedded in the Trump administration, and that Trump officials... What done? Oh, do you want to bring me the remote control and I'll show you which button? You bring me the remote control, sweetie, and I'll show you the button.
It doesn't work. It's on the Nintendo.
Is the Nintendo connected to the television though?
Yes.
Then you bring me the remote control
But
and I'll show
Daddy
you.
it didn't work when he was trying to pose it with the control.
Okay. Or maybe it's starting to mute a little bit by itself. How exciting. Yes, now he's muting and he's commenting and I can't even see. That's an exciting development. Hooray. So yes, we were covering the intelligence report. This is the product of official deliberations and investigations confirming that, yes, there were receipts that Russian-affiliated people were openly sending Republican politicians packages of disinformation blurbs. And that has not been a surprise to people who follow it intently on Twitter. But of course, Twitter is not the real world. It is an intense subsection, often at the extremes of the bell curve. And yes, so what the deal is with an intelligence report is it takes the message out more broadly. And then media outlets begin at least to debate the contents of the report and highlight that, yes, okay, as much as we had a lying attorney general to cover for Trump's activities before, to misrepresent the findings of the Mueller report and pretend that Trump was exonerated, there's a new sheriff in town. And that sheriff has appointed an attorney general who's just been confirmed, Merrick Garland. There's nobody to cover for Trump's pattern of malfeasance anymore, his pattern of active traitorous liaison with the Russian government. And there is a coalition of sorts between various Christian fundamentalist right-wing people and the government of Russia, because the government of Russia is manifestly, patently corrupt and has a veneer of democracy, but a very firm grip on government. So Putin can stay in office as long as he likes. He can collude with various oligarchs to direct a portion of profits from various enterprises into his own pocket. He can cut a share of fossil fuel products. So Putin is likely one of the most wealthy petrochemical oligarchs in the entire world. And what else? The Russian population, 25% of whom apparently don't have access to an indoor toilet. So there's levels of impoverishment amongst Russians that we don't hear about as much. But Russia can't fund broadly efficacious social safety net programs in the same way that America can, because the profit margins in Russia are too skimmed off by a corrupt and entrenched political establishment that doesn't have a functional system of checks and balances, that has a primarily state-controlled media, that runs on a system of inflaming outrage around various things, much to say what America would be like if there was only Fox, and if Republicans continued to make progress with their goals of restricting voting access for as many people as possible, disenfranchising as many people as possible to make it so that a preponderance of Republicans find it easy to vote, and people in more democratic strongholds have various obstacles put in their path. Voting is precluded on Sundays, or their voting lines are longer, and you can't, and it's become illegal to bring food and water to people waiting in line for long periods of time. Marsha points out that Russia has a very large drug and alcohol problem. I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was a psychological function of learned helplessness, when the problems in your society are endemic and entrenched, and people don't feel that there are mechanisms for them to make progress. So kudos to those who have protested in various Russian cities over the last few months. Sometimes there's a tipping point that breaks through people's learned helplessness, and they say, this is so unacceptable that we feel compelled to put our personal safety on the line and to march in the streets against a self-satisfied despot like Putin, a murderous despot who has not only sought to poison his political opponent, Alexei Navalny, but to actually, I don't need to mute that comment. Yes, the US does have a significant drug and alcohol problem. And in fact, counties that that voted for Trump have an above average rate of deaths of despair, which is deaths primarily affecting white middle-aged people who have suicided from drug overdose or from lifestyle choices such as unaddressed obesity and drug use. And those sociologists describe those types of deaths as deaths of despair. And it's been noted that in counties where there were higher than average levels of deaths of despair, Trump was statistically more likely to have been the candidate chosen by a majority of voters. Yes, darling? You ready to go out? Well, you know Daddy makes good sandwiches now as well. We taught him good. Actually, he taught himself, but it was giving him the opportunity that was key, wasn't it? Yeah, the balloons lost some air. That's good. So yes, the life expectancy in the US has plateaued over recent years. And one of the causes has been an increase in deaths in white majority rural areas. And some social scientists have speculated that the deaths of despair are fueled by psychological maladjustment. And I speculate that this is fueled by an addiction to dysfunctional media machines, Fox, Hannity, Limbauer, who spread an ethos of complaining, a culture of grievance and entitlement, of whipping up outrage against the alleged privileges given to the Black community. It's not based in a historical understanding of America. It's based in a fabricated reality in which white people are entitled to own things, have better job opportunities, and to see efforts being made to redress imbalances through affirmative action is something that really hurts those people. They take it as often a hook to explain their own potential lack of success or wealth in life. And even if they are moderately successful, it still pains them to think that their worldview is being disproven by the success of some middle class or wealthy white Black people. The existence of successful Black people causes painful cognitive dissonance to those white people who just struggle to accept the equal worth of people of color. And that pain can be dealt with through drugs and alcohol. There's no bread left. Wow, you must have eaten a lot of bread today. Are there any strawberries left? You ate a whole packet? What about some apple? Is there any apple left? Is it? Okay, good luck. Yes, so there's lots of problems to start solving. Somebody says they receive zero help. Oh, that's in reference to the homeless problem. Yes, and in some states, homelessness is actively outlawed, which is unfortunate, and you'd think regressive if you wanted to actually solve the problem of homelessness. Homelessness there's a complicated interplay between environmental factors and personal factors on part of the individual. Some people need help to have a functional approach to life. And if they've given up and they've encountered so many obstacles in their life, for example, if they're veterans suffering from complicated post-traumatic stress disorder, if they're victims of domestic violence who have fled untenable living circumstances, these are all problems that society can help with. But if people have individually determined they enjoy the level of freedom experienced with not having bills, people might say, well, there's no way somebody homeless would choose to not have a home. But it can be a factor if home life has been very oppressive, and in, I'm sure, multiple instances it has been. Eleanor's here. Hi, Eleanor. So yes, there are lots of ways in which various functional, well-governed societies have chosen to improve or ameliorate the problems experienced by people who are temporarily or even long-term without a home or access to a home. So yes, my little racist person says good point, because it is a point that conservatives often cleave to, that they focus on the role played by individuals in their own misfortune. And I don't discount the fact that there sometimes is a role played by individuals in their own misfortune. But I would also like to point out that most conservatives overlook the luck part of the good fortune played in the lives of successful people. And in functional societies, there is often an effort to help people through their misfortune, and who have an understanding that societies are better when there is help available. Good morning to someone called Be Kind. I prefer not to be called Sweetie, or at least I prefer in this moment not to be called Sweetie. So that's just a small preference I'm putting out there. I've noticed that when I am more accepting of being called Sweetie or Darling, that sometimes it establishes a dynamic that has the potential to veer onto a path of condescension. So that's my position at the moment. I will put forward that people change over time. Someone said quite memorably on Twitter that if they had met themselves 2 years ago, they could have a conversation. There would be differences in his outlook with his past self, but they could talk and debate. But he said, if I think I had met myself 5 years ago, we would have found very little common ground for conversation, and we might even have come to blows over our differences of opinion. Now, that's quite startling and quite useful to remember when trying to at least remember the humanity of those we disagree with, because we disagree with ourselves. We have the ability to change our opinions, and if we make an honest effort to use our memory to travel back in time and go, did we still hold these same opinions, or have we changed or progressed, or just not necessarily progressed or regressed? Have we changed our thoughts and ideas? And how would we get along with our past selves? Would we advocate punching our past self in the face? Hopefully not. Hopefully we could learn to extend a degree of self-compassion to ourselves as others, with always in mind the idea that you want a society to be as free as possible from the dysfunctional qualities of hatred and contempt for others. So I'm sure a lot of those who stand up in defense of people who've been cancelled, as it were, or have undergone some socially spread condemnation of their past activities, those who stand up in defense are probably people who recognize in their own past, I too have held some less than desirable opinions and worldviews. So we don't just leave it up to the people who are always promoting compassion and understanding and forgiveness, because sometimes those people are perpetuating a dynamic of racism that actively causes harm to others, whether or not that harm is intentional. Marsha has a habit of using endearments without meaning anything disparaging. Me too. And I should acknowledge that as well, that I call my friends darling. They don't usually respond. And then I think, oh, if I'm the only one saying darling, does that mean I should stop? And look, nobody's told me to stop. But I think in the context of broadcasting, I'm probably going to stick to a position of asking people to avoid using diminutives such as sweetie, because I'm broadcasting, and I recognize friends amongst my familiar audience attendees, but I don't want to be anybody's sweetie at this point. At this point, I choose no. And pressed a button. All right, now I think I'm going to go hang out with my family, but let's just see quickly if there's any more news I want to go through. Yes, President Joe Biden, Senator Joe Manchin, and Senator Dianne Feinstein are now making noises that they're in favor of eliminating the filibuster as it currently stands. So Joe Biden said he's in favor of restoring the talking element to a filibuster, which means you have to put your mouth where your donor money is. If you want to sabotage the passage of a bill, you have to get on your feet and talk for the requisite number of hours in order to be able to collectively work with your Republican colleagues to sabotage the passage of a bill. And Senator Feinstein has said, ideally, the Senate can reach bipartisan agreement, but if that proves impossible and Republicans continue to abuse the filibuster by requiring cloture votes, I'm open to changing the way the Senate filibuster rules are used. Now, this is very important with regards to preserving American democracy, because Republicans are taking a lot of actions at state levels to sabotage and disenfranchise the right to vote. And yes, Christopher says it's your house, you make the rules. And yes, it's possible to use hearts to endorse people's comments. Saying love and dear is something Eleanor uses. And let's all just see how we go. Let's see how we go for that. But I'm happy to have said something. I promised to talk about the Hatch Act. Yes, the Trump administration held a big campaign rally on the lawns of the White House. So many people today are saying the Hatch Act is dead. You can't have the Washington Post chide newly admitted Marcia Fudge, who's the Secretary of Housing of HUD, because she was asked 2 questions by reporters. The first question she didn't respond to. They were asking her about the chances of Democratic candidates in Ohio for a Senate race there. And the second time she did respond that she thought the Democratic candidate had a good chance. And that is a violation of the Hatch Act, because you're not supposed to use the podium. You're not supposed to endorse political candidates for one party or another when you are in the cabinet, when you hold that type of office. But yes, a lot of people obviously have pointed out the hypocrisy of that. I've spoken out many times to say, look, hypocrisy to me is not a good center focus for a discussion. You talk about principles. Do we want to restore the Hatch Act? Do we want it to be a thing again? Yes, people are frustrated that only Democrats are sometimes held to account for breaking rules, and Republicans break rules so blithely and so seemingly without consequence that it's intolerable. And I understand and endorse that position. But I would still be okay with the Biden administration saying, oh, yes, that was a violation of the Hatch Act, a small violation and unintentional. Nevertheless, it was. And yes, you can see why people would be distressed in the context of the intentional, prolonged rally in blatant and flagrant violation of the Hatch Act on the lawn of the White House during the end of Trump's tenure. But yes, going forward, they want to uphold the spirit of the Hatch Act and therefore note that Marcia Tudge, is it Marcia Tudge? Should not have responded to that journalist's question and should have found a way to avoid answering. So that's the Hatch Act, which I promised to discuss. And my useful thing for today is to note that a lot of corporations cut funding to Republican candidates who supported the insurrection, who supported an attempted overthrow of the results of the election by voting against confirming the Electoral College results. So whilst they may have made statements originally, some of those corporations are trying to find a way around their previous stance and to once again begin donating to Republican politicians who have power and will give them access to power as a consequence of their resumed donation patterns. So people have pointed out that when they did make a stand to say we are cutting funding now, that was at the end of an election cycle and so didn't have very much consequence anyway. It was a fairly meaningless gesture. promising gesture. We were like, oh, good, a corporation's going to keep this up, and refused to donate to people such as Senator Josh Hawley, who actively supported the insurrectionists and made a fist gesture to them when he physically passed them on the morning of the sacking of the Capitol. But this person I saw on Twitter mentions an app called Goods, where you can look up company products and candidates they donate to, and then facilitate boycotting companies who are facilitating the undermining of democracy. So that's really good to know. Simple app name is GOODS, and I'm going to keep mentioning that because there is a power of individual action to achieve at some point enough critical mass to make a difference. So the more people that download an app that helps put the fear of God or the fear of justice in various corporate executives, then you may see more change occur. Corporations are capable of leading culture change in the US, and everybody would benefit from a reduction in domestic terrorism levels, a reduction in the proliferation of anti-democratic thinking and behavior, not only on part of Republican politicians, but on the part of their supporters who are locked into a symbiotic, dysfunctional relationship with them. The app is called Goods, and I'll type it into the comments section. How's the broadcast quality on HAPS? Oh yes, and I did say I was going to go hang out with my family, so I better do that. I'll just put the word goods up there so people can see, and just know that I will be referencing this on an ongoing basis. I will say also that I'm so happy for all the people getting vaccinated, and just to be aware that there are sometimes, I'm not going to talk about outliers. I'm going to talk about Trump's Mar-a-Lago club has been partially closed because of a COVID outbreak. So that's interesting. And with regards to Putin challenging Biden to a debate, Putin has evidently blinked and just made it clear that he was just wanting to improve relationships between the two countries, even though it's been established in America that Putin helped promote the idea of bounties on the heads of American service members who were fighting in Afghanistan, that there was money being paid to people in Afghanistan if they attacked and killed US service members. Maybe some of the evidence is not as robustly established as I think, but it's definitely been a topic worthy of investigation, and it's definitely part of a fabric of evidence that Putin has sought to damage and undermine America. Not to just damage American democracy. American democracy is the mechanism by which the people are served. So when you damage American democracy, you haven't just hurt an abstract construct, you have hurt the American people. So a very intelligent lawyer and author called Terry Canfield, who's on Twitter, and you should follow her, wrote that challenging Biden to a debate is a clever way to imply that there is room to debate, because debate assumes a shared set of facts, and then you debate the implications, which is therefore a tactic for elevating and giving credence to a falsehood. And there's lots of falsehoods that Putin's trying to elevate, trying to pretend that it's debatable whether or not he's a killer. Nope, it's not debatable, Putin. Everybody knows you authorized the poisoning of your political opponent and the subsequent jailing of your political opponent, Alexei Navalny, after he survived your attempted assassination of him. Eleanor says, have a great day. Paul says, hello. And Craig Rockwell can get his second Pfizer shot next month, which is fabulous. And yes, today Eleanor joined some groups to help people find appointments. That's awesome. Is that the groups that I was recommending to you for people who are underserved? Marsha got the Pfizer first dose as well. That's excellent. I'm really happy for all of you. It's great that it will increase your prospects for staying healthy. And there is a small study which also indicates, well, preliminary evidence to suggest that those affected by COVID in a long haul sense, those with some long COVID symptoms of enduring fatigue, severe fatigue, some of those people have seen their symptoms resolve in the wake of getting vaccinated. So some effect on their immune system functioning that has been kicked into gear, that has helped either reorganize their own immune responses or helped eliminate residual COVID viral particles lurking in their body. Don't know the mechanism, it's not established yet, but the very observation of some relief for long COVID sufferers as a consequence of getting vaccinated or following vaccination. That's one of the really promising things I've heard. I saw Senator Rand Paul attack Dr. Fauci and say that it was theatre to require people to wear masks or to even recommend that people continue to wear masks. But I think everybody knows that Senator Rand Paul is not very proficient at advancing the interests of Americans. In fact, he's very proficient at undermining safe outcomes for Americans. He himself spread COVID by failing to isolate himself after a COVID test. He went to the gym in the Senate area, and then he refused to wear a mask after that, as if having been infected conferred total immunity on him, which it didn't, because some people have been observed to be reinfected by a subsequent COVID variant. So Rand Paul, as always, he's working against Americans. And as Senator John McCain, also a Republican, pointed out, Senator Rand Paul appears to be subservient to Vladimir Putin. So yes, Rand Paul is an ophthalmologist, and he formed his own organization to accredit himself, interestingly enough. All right, so that's my concluding remarks for today. Thank you so much for listening to the broadcast. And I will show off one final thing, because now I can share, and I have worked out how to do this thanks to Eleanor's help. Thank you, Eleanor. So this will be just a quick, cute listen to Secretary Marsha. Is it Marsha Fudge? Schooling the White House press corps in how to respond to someone saying good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Jen. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering if I was in this room by myself. Thank you very much, Jen.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm getting a very strong echo effect, but that was the length of the clip, just a brief clip. I'm just practicing showing off my sharing skills now. And I'm grateful to HAPS for providing that infrastructure to share things and to share audio. Did you all hear the echo on that as well, or was that just something I was hearing from my end? Thank you, Christopher, Marsha, Paul, Eleanor, and who else? I think that's everybody. Craig. Okay, great. Take care, everyone, and hope to talk to you again soon. I'm trying very hard to go to bed earlier so that I can broadcast at a more reasonable hour of the night for Americans during weekdays. So take care. Bye-bye, and see you all soon. Shalom, namaste. Needs a breath between it. Shalom, namaste. Night, Marsha.